Right. Good evening. We will now start this panel on sustainability in practice, global trends and innovations. As our other colleagues join, let us start the panel discussion today. And I would like to invite the three panelists we have today, starting with Mr. Alpan Raval, to please come onto the stage and take his seat. Mr. Raval is, we have a sort of interesting panel of three people coming from three distinct aspects of sustainability, finance, technology, and Mr. Narayan has been around for a long enough time to understand the sort of the macro picture on what sustainability is happening. So I congratulate our organizers for thinking through this panel sort of very carefully. Mr. Raval is the Chief AI and ML Scientist at Wadhwani Institute for Artificial Intelligence, a non-profit organization devoted to developing and deploying AI for social impact. They work in agriculture, health, and education right now. He has been a professor at Claremont College in California for a long time after his PhD from University of Maryland in theoretical physics. I meet very few of such PhDs. So good to know you. And subsequently, for reasons that I can understand, he left academia and moved on to the industry. He worked with DE Shaw Research, Amazon, and LinkedIn before he took up his current position at Wadhwani Institute. So our next, welcome, Alpan, thank you for joining us today. The second speaker I'm going to invite on stage is Mr. Chetan Savla. He's our He's our 1991 PGP alumnus. He's currently the president of Sustainability and Strategic Projects at Kotak Mahindra Bank. He has been with the Kotak Mahindra Group for a long time now. Before he took up this current position as president, he was head of group strategy for 4 years, and he worked for 18 years as an investment banker with Kotak Mahindra Capital Company. As part of his work in investment banking, he led over 80 capital market transactions and raised over $18 billion for corporate India, and advised Indian and global companies on their merger and acquisition transactions. So thank you, Chetan, for being here. I look forward to our conversations. The third speaker we have is Mr. P.S. Narayan. So Mr. Narayan has been instrumental in the creation of Wipro's sustainability initiative, and he has stewarded it since its inception in 2008. Wipro's charter is built on the core principle that business and social purpose must reinforce each other in addressing several key challenges around ecology and education. His background is a graduate in electrical engineering with an MBA, has more than 27 years of cross-disciplinary experience in business development, enterprise systems, and corporate sustainability. He teaches at several institutions in India as a guest faculty, broadly teaching sustainability, including at Azim Premji University, Xavier School of Sustainability, IIM Bangalore, and IIM Indore. And more importantly, he has been involved with the Confederation of Indian Industries Green Business Center, and he heads the Green Business Center's Bangalore chapter. So who gives him sort of this, the macro picture around what's going on, particularly in Indian industry around sustainability. Right? So welcome, Mr. Narayan. Thanks for joining us in today's session. My name is Rama Mohana Turaga. I'm a faculty here. I'm designated as the moderator for this session. Right? So let me set out what to expect from the panel before we start. We have about 90 minutes. We thought that we will have about 75 minutes of discussion among the panelists. and leaving around 15 to 20 minutes of questions in the end for the audience. To set the stage, as someone who has to follow the trends in sustainability for a living, it's such a dynamically evolving field that following what's going on is sort of exhausting, right? Today, you will see one disclosure framework that sort of everyone is talking about, and in a week's time, there is a new framework that you need to understand, right? So it's such a dynamically evolving field, and sort of there's a lot of debates happening around where we stand today. Is humanity going to end in 100 years, or are we doing really some path-breaking work that actually improve the lives of the human race, right? So there are debates happening from such a sort of existential questions to what I said is, which framework the company should adopt, right? So that's sort of the nature of the field that we are dealing with. So this session today will give us some opportunity to sort of step back and understand from our speakers what are some of the major trends that are happening in this field, particularly looking at from the lens of the practitioners, right? So the 75 minutes that we have with the panelists, I would like to divide it into like 3 broad themes, starting from very specific, looking at their own experiences working in their organizations, over these last several years. I will start with Mr. Narayan on this first part of what we would like to do as part of this panel is, since we have been not only with Wipro, but also looking at the Indian industry's sustainability efforts as part of CIA GVC, I would start with you asking you this question on what are some of the 2-3 central issues that industry is grappling with in our transition to sustainability, right? So I will start with you each. In the first round, I would like to each of you to speak for about 8 to 10 minutes, elaborating on your own work and how it fits into the broader trends around the sustainability transitions that we are all sort of aiming for, right? So we'll start with Mr. Narayan.
Thank you, Professor Turaga. Thank you, and absolute pleasure to be here. So, if one has to talk about the issues that industry faces today, one has to step back and go back a little bit in history. When I say go back a little bit in history, at least go back a couple of decades and see what is the path that industry has taken to arrive at where we are. In India, if you see, one way of looking at it is pre-regulation and post-regulation. What I mean by that is 2012 was when SEBI came out with regulations for industry to disclose, called the Business Responsibility Reporting, and 2013 when the CSR law was enacted. So, essentially regulatory requirements of companies to act and behave in a certain way happened in India, probably ahead of many other countries. What has been the effect of that is, among other things, is we will discuss. But even prior to that, there were a clutch of companies who were already engaged with sustainability, right? So why were they doing that? And we should differentiate between, for the purpose of this discussion, between sustainability and CSR. Because if you look at CSR, there are a lot of companies which are doing it even earlier. I mean, Tata's and other companies, they were already doing, they were engaged with communities. What changed in the 90s, in the mid-90s, in the late 90s, was with the enunciation of the triple bottom line framework by John Elkington, and then which GRI formalized it as a reporting framework, which a few companies started adopting, right? I think in India, one of the first companies was ITC, and then a few of us, we started in 2007. So why did we do that? Why did we do that when there was no regulation and so on and so forth, right? And this was a business responsibility framework, because this is about how you can, if you go by the first principles of the triple bottom line, how you can be responsible to multiple stakeholders rather than only the shareholder. which means you are effectively saying that I'm moving away from the shareholder first framework to a multiple stakeholder framework. I think in our case, if I will talk about our example, there were 2-3 reasons. One is our leadership team went through an extensive brainstorming exercise around 2005, 2006, spread over 12 to 18 months, debating on some of the central questions that we thought as a company will emerge in the decades and in the 21st century that we should be aware of. If you go back a little bit in our history, we started as a consumer goods company, as a vegetable oil company. Then we diversified to hydraulics in the 70s. And then we made a big diversification to IT in the late 70s and early 80s. So what we were asking ourselves is, if IT was a clear game changer in the 70s for India, what are the big game changers from a larger societal perspective that we should be looking at? And I think from that conversation emerged this thing that you must look at this broad trend of sustainability, however you want to define it, right? Whether it's from a risk perspective, from an opportunities perspective, from a normative perspective. So once that consensus came in, we didn't know enough about it because none of us, we didn't have a precedence. So we didn't have people to engage with it. So we said, okay, in principle, if this is what we should do, let's plunge into it. So we did 2-3 things. One is we started a formal sustainability charter, with embedded programs in climate change, water, diversity, equity, inclusion, and so on. And we also did certain market-facing initiatives, like we set up a business for renewable energy, which was part of our Wipro infrastructure engineering, and so on. Doesn't exist today, but we did that. So the reason for me to say this is that there was a leadership conversation which tried to look at the overall macro picture of how companies should be looking at the future, from which we made these decisions. Then, it sort of evolved, and then of course the regulations came. But because we had sort of set the foundation in those first few years, when the regulations came, I think we were reasonably clear in our minds as to what we should be doing. Now, fast forward to today, I think if you look at the scale, number one, you have many, many more companies that are engaged with ESG in different ways. Whether you like it or not, the driver of that has been regulation. The SEBI mandate that requires 1,000 top companies to disclose, the CSR mandate has been nudging, forcing, pushing companies to disclose, right? But within that picture, within that mosaic, you have differences. You have differences because at the end of it, the SEBI mandate is a comply or explain. It doesn't force you to do. You can report that you are doing nothing, or you can report on whatever you're doing, right? So what you're doing, the nuances of it, the seriousness of it varies from sector to sector, and within sectors it varies on companies, the way the boards think, the way the leadership thinks, the underlying culture. Because at the end of it, even if you frame policies, even if you frame processes, even if you invest in it, ESG is such a multifunctional, multidisciplinary thing, involving so many different stakeholders within the organization and outside the organization. Driving it like yet another corporate program will not help. There has to be an embedded culture, that will make sustainability sustainable in a corporate sense. So I'll just pause there.
Then I request Mr. Chetan to talk about the trends in sustainability financing. It has been at the sort of forefront of this at your organization. We're interested to know what are some of the things that Kotak are doing in terms of financing the sustainability. There's so much of demand with the renewable energy projects, social entrepreneurship. There's a bunch of things that are related to. So what are some of the things that you are doing, and have you tried something interesting that you would like to share with us?
So I'll try not to repeat some of the things that Narayan has said. We went through the same journey when business responsibility reporting started and did voluntary reporting of some of our emissions, some of our practices over a period of time. But the real shifting of gears, if I may call it, on this whole thing happened somewhere around 1920, 2021, when a series of few things happened all at once. Firstly, Reserve Bank of India came out with a paper which essentially talked about a 5-year strategy on financial inclusion. It's in public domain for those of you who are interested. It's a very interesting bunch of ideas and strategies which were put out by the regulator over there, asking financial institutions who are the regulated entities to focus on financial inclusion. Second is, around that time, there was a significant tightening that happened on the CSR regulations. And what was broad, loose kind of a regulation got very, very tight, project-driven, metric-driven, outcome-driven, monitoring-driven CSR became the norm. And the third thing that happened somewhere around that time is that SEBI moved from BRR to BRSR reporting. And around the same time, we saw increased intensity of our global institutional shareholders doing separate questioning meetings to us on our ESG practice. So as much as our investor relations would talk to them about ROE and returns and balance sheet and deposit growth, I would have separate meetings with some of these investors where their ESG team would come and ask us, what are we doing on this whole area? And we have had, investors tell us, if you don't do this, then 2 years hence we won't vote for you, etc. So it was that serious. So there came a fair amount of. So I guess what was happening with us was happening with other banks, was happening with broader corporate India. The conclusion around that 2021, I took over this practice. Obviously, we had been doing it in some way. The conclusion we came to was that for sustainability to be sustainable, the sustainability strategy needs to get embedded with a business strategy. These two need to talk to each other. Unless sustainability is seen as being enabler of business strategy and vice versa, the parts of sustainability which don't do that will receive lesser attention, will receive lesser seriousness unless they are forced by law. So we started thinking about sustainability in that manner. And if I now fast forward to today, broadly there are two big pillars on which a banking and financial institution needs to work on and should work on sustainability. One is financial inclusion, which talks to a set of the sustainable development goals on poverty, hunger, agriculture, etc., inequality. And then the whole piece about environment. We tend to think about climate environment as the main thing in sustainability, but from a bank's point of view, we see both these as equally important pillars. So I'll first talk about financial inclusion. So at our end, financial inclusion was already embedded because over the years, Reserve Bank of India has mandated 40% of our balance sheet has to be lent to what is defined as priority sector lending. Out of this 40%, now 10% has to go to small and marginal farmers who have 2 acres or less land each. Overlapping to this small and marginal farmers, 12% has to go of the total lending book has to go to weaker sections of society, which include these small and marginal farmers, but also include a few other sections. 7.5% of our total lending needs to go to micro SMEs, which are defined even by the government in 3 different, medium, small, and micro. So it has to go to that. So we have to achieve these targets, and these were there for many years. But about 3 to 4 years back, there came a new instrument called Priority Sector Lending Certificates. So if I was doing surplus in one of the segments and somebody else was a deficit in that segment, RBI provided a trading mechanism called e-Kuber, where these certificates started trading. So I could buy, sell, buy, sell. This market, which was 50,000, 1 lakh crore 4 or 5 years back, in just the small and marginal farmer segment this year is over 5 lakh crores. Just the other PSL segment, which is for the medium and small SMEs, that segment is another 5 to 6 lakh crores. So overall, about 8 to 10 lakh crore kind of a market where this is getting traded. Think about this like a carbon trading mechanism. You have somebody doing surplus and getting the credit, somebody not getting the credit, and here is a market which is kind of demonstrative of a cap and trade. So PSL was one big leg of financial inclusion which we focused on, and we ensured that over the last 3-4 years we have achieved and exceeded those targets. Second is we as a company started looking at stakeholders in 4 categories. So the company, the customer, the colleague, which is our employees, and the community. Community comprising of society around us and of the environment and planet. Customer, which includes the customers who need financial inclusion services. And of course, employees, where one of the most important sustainability driver is our gender diversity. So within these 4 stakeholders, the way we can deliver our sustainability efforts is by providing products, by providing the right distribution, by providing risk management as a tool, and by doing CSR. These are the 4 methods through which we can dive. So that's a matrix, 4 stakeholders, 4 methods, and within this we have to essentially play. So if I pick a few of them, on distribution, we went, there were always bank branches, and RBI had enabled the ability of banks to appoint what is known as business correspondents, who are essentially agents or business facilitators who are a lesser level of agents, to act like a branch and reach out to areas where we cannot reach just now. So we created a network of BC and BF through the country, enabled them with digital connectivity to our platform so that they are able to distribute loans, bank accounts, and also provide cash withdrawal and cash depositing services. The third one being, again, using technology of micro ATMs and Aadhaar enabled payment systems. So if you go to a mom and pop shop in a village where we don't have a presence for 50 kilometers, 100 kilometers, but there is this mom and pop shop who will, using a small a phone and a small biometric reader, he'll be able to dispense cash from a Kotak Mahindra Bank account. So this is the way distribution got enhanced, and this is working quite well. Then we had our moment on 8th November 2016 when demonetization was announced. So based on the acronym of 8th November, we launched a product called 811. So this is our digital bank account opening product, where within 2 to 3 minutes using your Aadhaar card and an OTP, you can open a bank account and then do KYC later on and start using the services instantly. On the back of this, we embedded in both our 811 account and our mobile banking journey some of the government schemes. So you have a Pradhan Mantri life insurance product, you have a Pradhan Mantri accident insurance PMSBY, and you have a Atal Pension Yojana, which is the government's pension product. All of these got embedded into our digital journeys. What physically volumes we were able to achieve, by putting them on our digital products, the volume just went up 10-fold, 15-fold, and just started getting distributed very effectively. In addition to this, banks were required to set up Aadhaar Seva Kendras. So in our branches, we have people sitting and servicing the changes that you need in your Aadhaar card. You want to add, you want to make a new application. All of these things can be done in a bank branch at selected branches. But we decided that we'll take why does this person need to sit in a branch? We took this machine out, we took this person out, put it in a van, and that van became our mobile Aadhaar Seva Kendra, and we started moving this at various places. Aadhaar, as you know, is again an enabler of opening Jandan accounts and of opening 811 accounts. So that essentially increased the distribution of financial products. By making products like this available to people, like the Jandan account or the zero balance account is a massive enabler for people in rural and distant areas, for them to be able to access financial services. And it is the first point that is required. So that was through distribution. On products, we essentially also distributed some of the government loan schemes. They have a street vendor scheme. They have a Stand Up India, which is for women entrepreneurs. They have a Mudra scheme, which is for SME borrowers. So most of those are standard government designed products backed by government guarantees in certain cases, and we distributed these products through our network. Finally, on the CSR side, we picked up projects which were both environment friendly as well as financial inclusion friendly. So there are projects which we are doing just now which address rural livelihood. So it's a combination of soil improvement with watershed development, with training on farming practices and various things which we embed in an area where anyway we have a lot of agricultural business. We do a lot of tractor financing, we do a lot of crop financing, etc., micro lending. So in those areas we go and do these additional CSR projects which kind of builds and develops a cluster. So that's how we kind of embedded CSR over there. So that is a bunch of things that we have been, I'm not saying everything. I'll take a minute and talk about the climate side of it. The climate side of it has been relatively new, and there is a draft RBI guideline which is already in place, which talks about banks need to measure their scope 3 emissions, which is essentially financed emissions, and manage their risk on the back of that. But not too many banks have been able to do too much, and I'll talk about the challenges later on. But the two things that we did on the climate side, and both of these were through our CSR initiative. One was with IIT Madras, we set up Kotak IIT Madras Save Energy Mission. This is a hub and spoke model, the hub being in IIT Madras. The spokes are in 10 other IITs/NITs across the country. And the teams who are there in these centers, they go to MSMEs in a 100-kilometer radius around the center, and they ask them to apply for a free energy audit. And the center selects, there's a waiting list. In fact, they select people who they believe will implement some of these recommendations. Then after selecting, they actually go do an audit, make recommendations, and there are these MSMEs don't have the wherewithal. Sometimes it's as simple as stop a leakage of steam somewhere, or stop use better electric wiring, etc. So those changes are suggested, and I don't have the absolute numbers handy as of now, but many times our project expenditure is now annualized energy savings as per our calculations, which will be there forever. So we are expanding this program, this KAISEM. And the second is we thought that capacity building in the area of sustainability is very important. So we partnered with IIT Kanpur, and we are setting up a school of sustainability inside IIT Kanpur, which is bringing together all their vertical faculties, which talk to the area of sustainability, whether it is their Clean Ganga mission or it is an energy efficiency division. And they are adding a few areas which talk to the social aspects of sustainability, and they're creating this new school, which will both, we are investing in the infrastructure as well as in the softer part of the, so I'll leave it just now.
Thank you so much, Chetan. But just before we move to Alpan, quickly, one question that I have with financial institutions is that, globally, if you look at, there has been a lot of, there's a movement around divesting from fossil fuels, has there been any change in your lending decisions by incorporating risk from climate change, or more generally the ESG kind of risk? Have you seen any change in the way you make these decisions around lending, especially large sort of portfolios, right? Have you developed any processes, or have you observed any changes in the way you operate on that front?
So 3 years back, we developed a framework which has 60 metrics in a scorecard, which we embedded into our credit evaluation. We did it for transactions which were more than 75 crores in size, and which where the tenure of lending was 3 years or more, because that's where the risk was really important to be evaluated. And we use that scorecard to get a understanding of what the ESG performance of that company looks like. To be honest, we haven't really used it for taking go, no-go decisions, but at least it improves the understanding of the decision makers. Coming to credit decisions, the other thing which we did is sectorally, we picked up the power generation sector 2 years back and our lending to that sector. And we compared the power generation representative pathway of the world, of India, and of our portfolio based on their stated ambitions in terms of how these three look. And obviously the evaluation was that if my lending portfolio is on a pathway which is towards net zero, which is above the Indian pathway, then it's at risk. But we didn't find that to be the case. We found, obviously I must admit that this was a lot of work done with our own thinking, with our own evaluation internally, and it's still work in progress. Last year we picked up steel and cement to add to this.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Yeah. To Alpan, you are at the intersection of two words that seem to currently at the lips of everyone, AI and sustainability. So can you tell us a little bit about how sort of AI can actually enable sort of transitions towards sustainability in the sectors that you work in?
Sure. Yeah. First, thank you for the opportunity to speak here. I hope people can hear me at the back. Yeah. Okay. So we are an AI non-profit, and so we almost stumbled into sustainability. It's not something that we've been doing with the active intention of doing sustainable work, but it's sort of a byproduct of the work that we do anyway. Right? So so whatever I say, you should take it with that pinch of salt, that we are doing projects that are AI projects fundamentally, and they are AI projects targeted towards improving lives and livelihoods of underserved populations, and therefore they are sustainable projects. Okay. So just a bit of history. I don't think many people know about us. We are a fairly small institute. As I said, we are a non-profit, and there was a reason why we took the decision to go non-profit, which I'll explain in a minute. We are about 6.5 years old, roughly 250 employees. We sustain ourselves, sorry to use the word, we sustain ourselves through grants from various foundations, including the Gates Foundation and Google and Meta and so on. We work in the areas of public health, primary education, and smallholder farming agriculture. Right? There are the reason we started on this route of doing AI for these areas was we saw a gap. So we started around 2018, 2019. At that time, we saw this gap where most of the AI work that was being done, this is pre-Gen AI, obviously. I call it the BC era, before ChatGPT. So in this era, we saw that there was this gap where most of the AI that was being developed for either by big tech companies, internet companies essentially, companies like Google, Microsoft, or social media companies like Facebook and LinkedIn, where I used to work earlier. They were very targeted. They had high, there was all this talk about big data, data velocity, data quality, and so on, because all of these companies had the luxury of large amounts of data coming in at high velocity. In fact, many people might not know this, but 50% of sites on the internet are churned every week. So if you go from 1 week to the next, if you were to count all the different sites that exist on the internet, 50% are brand new. So there's that amount of churn in the data on the internet. And so that was a very golden opportunity to apply AI to understand customers acting on the internet, players on the internet, right, essentially. And then there were a few healthcare type AI applications. which were also very urbanized sort of applications. So what we asked ourselves was, there is nobody really doing high-tech, cutting-edge tech for underserved communities, for people who are at the bottom of the economic pyramid, who live in rural areas and so on. But the opportunity space is huge because there is all this data that potentially exists about these people, right? So can we use this data to help them? So this was the idea, and the reason we structured ourselves as a non-profit was we realized that in order to deliver AI at scale, you would need a large platform. And the only way we thought that we could get access to large platforms was by working with the government, and the government has a sort of biased interest in partnering with non-profits. So this was the thinking. So the areas where we work in, we have about 30 different projects going on, different AI projects. We develop AI from scratch. Our operating model is typically if we want to work in a certain area, for example, healthcare, the first thing we did was to embed ourselves within the e-health ministry. So we put a team within the ministry. And the purpose of this team is to discover problems that are impactful, discover data sets that may be used to solve these problems, and to plug into deployment platforms, right? And then our back-end tech team does the AI work. So, for example, one of the big areas in India is in healthcare is tuberculosis. Tuberculosis kills far more people than COVID has killed. It usually doesn't affect the people who are in this room. It affects a very different demographic of people, and therefore it goes unobserved, right? So this is one aspect of the TB problem. The other aspect is India has the largest digital platform for TB in the world. I think a lot of people don't know it. It's called the Nikshay platform. It's been around for about a decade now, and by law, every patient who gets TB in the country is horizontally tracked through the Nikshay platform. So from the time they are diagnosed with TB all the way to the final health outcome that they have, every single interaction with the health system by law has to be tracked through the Nikshay platform. So there's all this extremely rich data from across the country of all TB patients. Now, the data is of variable quality, etc., but it's there, right? So we are doing a number of projects in TB that use AI, and that use AI to make a huge difference. And so just some examples. For example, we are using AI to figure out where the missing cases are. It's estimated that every year about 1 million TB patients are not even diagnosed, right? Excuse me. Because they don't go to a doctor, or they exhibit symptoms but ignore them until it's too late, and so on. So we use AI to figure out geolocations across the country where these patients might be, so that you can increase the top of the funnel, screen more patients, treat more patients, and thus reduce the TB burden, right? We have another one at the opposite end of the spectrum, where if you have a TB patient who started treatment, one problem with TB is it's been a curable disease for the last 100 years, and still you have millions of people dying of TB, right? And the reason there is this contradiction, one of the main reasons is that people don't complete TB treatment. Standard TB treatment, and there's a lot of research going on in sort of shortening the TB treatment duration, but the standard TB treatment in India, for example, is a 6-month treatment where you have to take your medicines every day. If you skip 10% of your doses, so you skip 1 in 10 days, your chance of getting drug-resistant TB increases by a factor of 3. Right? And the moment you get drug-resistant TB, then that's very serious. It's very difficult to treat. And there's extreme drug-resistant TB as well. So it's very important that patients take their medicine every day. And the medicines are supplied for free by the government. Yet the demographic that gets TB is not the demographic that tends to adhere to medication. They are migratory workers, they're truck drivers, people like that. They stop taking medicines the moment they feel better, right? They stop taking medicines if they get symptoms different from the ones that they had already, which are side effects of the medicines. So there are a number of reasons. So using data from Nikshay, for example, we developed a predictive model that will predict at the start of treatment initiation whether the patient is likely to complete treatment or not. So it gives a risk score to the patient, that this patient is highly risky in terms of stopping treatment midway. Now once TB health workers on the ground have real-time access to these risk scores, they can go and target patients who are at high risk. So they can go to their homes and remind them every day, for example, did you take your medicine? They actually do that. If they're medium risk, they can call them. So you can take appropriately triaged behavior depending on the risk score. So this has been rolled out in, I think, 3 states so far. We are integrating it into the latest version of Nikshay, and that should happen in a month or so. And then it's going to be rolled out pan-India, so that every TB health worker on the ground will have access to these risk scores. The other problem with TB is that screening for TB is very expensive, and confirmatory tests are very expensive. So confirmatory tests are typically genetic tests that test for the DNA of the TB bacterium in your blood, and they are extremely expensive. You can't administer them at scale. So typically what's done is a screening test, which is an X-ray. So they do a chest X-ray. If you're suspected of pulmonary TB, they do a chest X-ray. If the chest X-ray is positive, you go for the confirmatory genetic test. The problem is even chest X-ray is expensive in rural areas. It's not standard. It's very difficult to ask someone to walk or to go 10 kilometers away from their village to another village where there might be an X-ray machine. Very difficult. It affects their livelihoods, right? So one of the things we are developing is a simple smartphone-based screening tool for TB, which is based on solicited cough sounds. So the patient wears a mask and coughs in the vicinity of a smartphone 3 times. The AI analyzes the sound and figures out if you need a confirmatory test or not. It's not a diagnostic, and this is an important distinction which we can come to talk about later. I think it's important for AI not to do diagnosis, but the good thing is then it tells you whether you need a confirmatory test, and it's easy to use. We purposely, when we collected data for this, we purposely used the cheapest smartphones that are available because we wanted to robustly work on cheap devices. So we work on areas like this. In maternal and child health, for example, we've developed a computer vision AI where you take a video of a baby in their home setting and it tells you the weight, the height, the head circumference and the chest circumference. Now this is really important because you have to look at the system that it's replacing. The current system in the field is, thanks to various incentives that were done by the government in the past, about 80% of babies in India are born in hospitals, which is a good thing. The problem starts when they go home. So when they're born in a hospital, they are weighed accurately, they're monitored accurately. The moment they go home, the monitoring stops. Accurate monitoring stops, rather. So typically the way monitoring is done is an ASHA worker goes home to home and with essentially one of those, spring balances that you use to weigh vegetables, right? And puts the baby in a sari and makes a sling out of the sari, ties it to the spring balance, and then eyeballs the weight, right? Now you can imagine that the system is rife with errors, right? First of all, the spring balances aren't calibrated. Some of those springs have gotten rusty and old. There's all kinds of errors in measurement. They may not eyeball it properly. Then they actually have to note down the weight in a register. And there's errors there as well. And the problem there is, according to WHO standards, if a baby is less than 2.5 kg in the first 6 weeks following birth, then the ASHA worker has to do a lot of extra work. They have to take interventions. They have to do counseling to the mother on nutrition and things like that, which they don't have time to do. So what do? If it shows 2.3 kg, they round it up to 2.5. So if you look at the statistics of baby weights across India, you'll see a huge peak at 2.5. Just because the WHO cutoff is 2.5. Right? It's not real, it's an artifact. So we don't have good measurement. If you don't have good measurement, you don't have good policy. Right? So it affects the individual and it affects policy. Right? So that was the reason why we developed this AI, which took about 4 years, mainly because of the complexity of the data collection. We went out into the field with digital weighing scales, and we weighed 30,000 babies in different parts of India, right? And that was used to train the AI. And now we've got it working to about 100 grams average error. It's very robust in the field. We've done all kinds of tests where, we train the AI in Gujarat and test it in Punjab. We train it in Punjab and test it in Gujarat and so on. And it's working fine. So it's completely rolled out in all PHCs in Daman and Diu right now. That's our pilot deployment. And we'll continue to monitor it. If it works well, the plan is to roll out, wherever we can, whichever is a willing state government. So similarly, then in education, we have, for primary education, one big problem is assessment. Assessment is a basic problem in education. You do good assessment, then you can get to pedagogy and influencing learning outcomes. So one of the things we've developed is, and this is rolled out in Gujarat currently, is a oral reading fluency tool where the student between grades 3 and 8 reads a piece of text. The AI tells you where where the student got the words wrong, and it does this in a dialect agnostic way. So you can be speaking in a Ahmedabadi dialect or a Kathiawadi dialect or a Kutchi dialect. It will still tell you, if you're true to the dialect, it will tell you that you got it right. It won't tell you you got it wrong. But if you really make an error, it will tell you you got it wrong. So it assigns a reading fluency score to the student, and it tells the student where they got it wrong so that they can practice. So this has been used so far by 2.5 million students across Gujarat. And the primary mode with which it's being used is the teacher is administering it to the student. But the more interesting thing now is that we've got all this data of 2.5 million students. We've got their voice data, reading stuff, which we've stored in the back end. So we know at a very granular level, we can do various things with it. At a very granular level, we know what students are getting wrong where, literally at a student to student personalized level, right? So now using Gen AI, we are designing content that is personalized to the student because we know what they're getting wrong. So then we can design content that influences the student to practice things that they're getting wrong and therefore improve their learning outcomes. Because we have voice data, we can also diagnose things like dyslexia, learning disabilities, and so on, because often children with learning disabilities tend to have a different pattern of speaking and pauses and so on, and we have all this data in the back end. So there's a lot of potential with this for addressing the UN Sustainable Development Goals. So that's just a flavor of the kind of projects we do. As I said, we have a lot of things going on. About 7 or 8 of these are in deployment stage already. The remaining are in development stage.
That's fascinating. Thank you, Alpan. And every day we are only worried about how students are plagiarizing using ChatGPT. Now we have found better things that ChatGPT can do, and then happy to learn about that. So moving on a little bit to more sort of general issues around sustainability transition. One of the things that I wanted to sort of pick their brains is on, in academic research on corporate sustainability, one of the questions that is sort of is extensively studied over the past few years is that if you look at the the corporate initiative, voluntary initiatives, disclosure frameworks, there have been exploding over the past decade or so, right? Whereas we continue to hear from climate scientists and environmentalists and how the planet is heating more and more, and we are losing biodiversity. So some of them look at this as a paradox, right? Where we have a explosion of corporate initiatives on sustainability that seems to have the implicit understanding is that doesn't seem to have not so much of an impact on what is actually happening, right, on environment and society. So, which means that while they are trying to do stuff, right, there are certain challenges that limit what they can sort of bring to the table in terms of changing, addressing some of these big challenges that we face. So I would like, based on your broader understanding of the trends or something from your personal experience working in your organizations. What do you think are some of the key challenges in sort of transition, right, that we are looking for? And if you have some ideas on how do we sort of, what are some of the things that we should be doing, either it is governments or, academicians and researchers or whoever it is, right, that will enable this transition sort of more rapidly in a way that it is consistent with what we need, right, in terms of addressing these grand challenges. So, I mean, open to any one of you who wants to take a stab at it.
Okay. See, I think what you've raised is that at the heart of this dilemma that corporations are facing, that there seems to be this treadmill effect, that the more you do, this question on whether it is making the actual impact on it. But the example that you heard, okay, from both of them on financial inclusion or the application of technology, or take the value chain examples of hundreds of companies adopting net zero targets, many of them very close to 100% renewable energy and so on. If you look at them in isolation, then really very, very good things are happening, right? The question of does it add up or does it add up sufficiently enough to make a dent is, I think, a tough one. And I think that's where fast enough. I think that's where I think there is a fundamental change for corporations compared to the conventional paradigm of where if you invested correctly, if you invested the right resources, if you had your strategy right, and if you implemented well, you would be reasonably assured of outcomes that were sort of, sustained into a continuous loop, and you would give you a sense of gratification that you did the right thing. In this case, you do everything you can, okay, but it doesn't seem to be more than a blip in the overall scheme of things, right? So that is something the social sector conventionally has been used to. So they have this long-term orientation that it takes years, it takes decades to change something, which the corporate world has never been used. So that is a change in mindsets that you need to bring in. It's easier said than done, because at the end of the day you want to look at, listen, but what's actually happening? I think corporations are going through that maturity journey. What is important is for companies to do two things: to continue doing the best they can, to to reflect on that, to measure that, to reflect on that, to report that. All that is good, but at the same time to be clear-eyed on this point that, listen, like Wipro might be 100% renewable energy in the next 3-4 years. We are currently 85%. We should be 100% renewable energy by 2028 or so, right? We should meet our net zero goals probably 5 years ahead of our target for 2040, which I think is reason for us to feel good about. At the same time, we should also, be clear that it is not going to help much in moving the needle on climate change because of the nature of the problem. In India, because of the fact that it is a developing economy, its dependence on fossil fuels is going to continue for a very long time. Estimates say that by the time the first thermal power plant is shut down, which UK did a few weeks back, for India will probably be after 2045. So that's the way it is, right? So there are two things, there are two tracks. One is I'm doing all that I can, and that is good. But at the same time, also be aware that it's probably adding up little, but you can't see that progress visibly happen. And you need to do that for everything. You need to do that for DEI. You need to do that for health. Everything you need to do that. That is a difficult act for companies.
With acknowledging, for example, that what they are doing, whatever may be beyond feeling good, if it is the recognition that it is not really is just a blip in the broader issue, how does it help? How does it help either the companies or the society, right?
I think that, so very briefly, I think that's where the whole concept of, having a responsibility mindset comes in. Where you say that, between the option of doing nothing or maintaining status quo, like what was the case 20, 30 years back, now you're doing many things. And it's not that, but they have a lot of value in it. But the nature of these issues are such, whether it is, inclusion at a country level scale like India, or of climate change, that even if you aggregate it, add it up, it's going to probably move the needle very little and very slowly. That's what it is. So you have to acknowledge that.
But things like science-based targets initiatives and all, which claims to, push companies beyond what is convenient for them, right? One of the critiques of what companies do, and the reasons why it may be just a blip rather than sort of contributing significantly to it, is that especially when it is entirely voluntary, right? Operating within this broader sense that the fiduciary duty is for shareholder value maximization, right? In an entirely voluntary setup, you would do what you think is sort of makes sense economically for the company. And one of the critique in this academic research is saying that that limits the ambition in terms of what companies can do, in terms of actually making what their efforts more than a blip, right? So is there any way to sort of nudge companies to think more ambitiously in terms of how they can contribute to addressing these challenges? Or
I'll let them answer, but just two lines on that. I think SBTi is a good example of where, at least prima facie on paper, they're asking companies to align the targets with the Paris goal, with the Paris Agreement goal of 2050. So if you subscribe to the SBTi framework, you have to set your goals and targets in that. And after that, it's a matter of you're executing it well or not. Of course, the larger question among climate scientists is that even if every country meets their NDCs and every company meets their net zero targets, it's still not going to be sufficient. But that's a different question. Yeah.
So I'll probably base it on a very simplistic kind of a foundation before I get into my specific industry. But finally, if you are looking at emissions are a function of how many people are there, what and in what mix they are consuming, how much and in what mix they are consuming, and how are those products and services created. It's just a function of these three things. How many people are there, you can't control. In what mix they are consuming and how much they are consuming is behavior, and behavior will change, but it will take a long time. This third piece, I think I'm not a technical background, but I read Bill Gates' book on climate risk, and his final conclusion was it is technology and only technology which will finally solve how these products and services are produced in a better manner such that emissions are controlled. And if we see what is really happening at the back of it, wherever the economics have played out, that is what is working well. Electric vehicles are selling now because the economics have worked out. But we were part of something called Climate Finance Leadership Initiative, which had the Tata, L&T, and a few other companies together. One of the things that I heard a person from L&T say that if in your locality, if everybody has an electric vehicle, then you will have to invest a massive amount in the grid infrastructure in that area. So what are those fallouts which will happen as a result of that? So if I now step back and say, okay, when I, as a financial institution, the best economic interest I have in participating in this process is with what is my primary strength, which is risk management. So, and that is what our regulator is also telling us. They have put out a draft regulation which says measure the emissions and measure the risk of those emissions on your lending portfolio and take actions to essentially ensure those risks are within acceptable limits. Now, what are the challenges? We don't have a taxonomy in India. I hope that that's coming soon from the government or from RBI or from somebody so that there's uniform standardization. Secondly, if I want to know physical risk of my collaterals against my loans at a lat long level or even at a pin code level, I don't have data which tells me that in 400020, what is the risk of floods, what is the risk of excessive rainfall. That data is not available in a uniform manner today. Hopefully, I know that there are a few people who are trying to put that into place. On the back of those two, there are multiple methods of conversion factors and all of that. So there is, again, hopefully an Indian standard which is hopefully soon coming, which will help us to put the emission calculation on the and the physical risk assessment in place. Then financial institutions will start managing that risk. And as we start managing that risk, we will hopefully drive behavior of our borrowers in a direction in which is kind of beneficial from the climate perspective. Will it move the needle? I don't think it will. It is technology and only technology which will make a difference.
You are a slightly different situation. You are a non-profit rather than a for-profit company like the other two. And there are many non-profits who are, of course, are at the center of trying to move the needle in a variety of ways. One way is to putting pressure on them to be more ambitious, but in your case, it's more like actually doing. What is your perspective on what kind of challenges that you face in terms of translating some of these technologies into, like he just said that it's all about technology, right?
Yes,
so it makes it important that
economics of technology.
Yeah, it might well be, but no, overall I completely echo what Mr. Narayan said, which is that what we do is a drop in the ocean, and there needs to be many such drops for this to become scalable. So a lot of people need to do this kind of work. But there are also various challenges that are specific to the technology we use, namely AI, and the public perception of AI and how people use AI, especially in the after ChatGPT era. The way AI is being used I have a lot of concern about that, and it's a challenge even when we talk to stakeholders, because everybody wants a chatbot, right? Whenever we talk to stakeholders. The problem with AI as a technology essentially, and that has not changed with Gen AI actually. What does all that LLMs do is predict the next word, and the way they do the next word prediction is a statistical average of essentially, Anish and I were just talking about that, essentially people who have contributed to Wikipedia, right? So you're getting the statistically average opinion of Wikipedia contributors. Right? This is what it is, right? It's not magic. The problem is people don't understand this. AI as such is a very brittle technology, and I always tell people AI is a technology of last resort. It is not a technology of first resort. If you can solve a problem without using AI, then that is how you should solve the problem, right? It's only when you can't solve the problem any other way, then you use a brittle and expensive technology like AI. And it's expensive in every way. AI developers are expensive, the compute is expensive, the data requirements are very high. So it's very, very hungry. It's a very hungry technology. Plus, it doesn't work. It's not like you build an AI and you measure it to be accurate and then you can let it go like a software system. After some time, there will be data drift and its outputs will change, and it may not work. I mean, when I used to, for example, I used to develop AI models for advertising on the internet. This was long ago, and I'm sure things are even worse right now. But the AI models had a lifetime of only 1 week, right? So in 1 week, an AI model will go stale. So you have to have retraining. Retraining is again costly, more compute, etc., etc. So in that sense, you have to look at the limitations of this beast called AI when you use it. The other problem is it's statistical, right? So it is error prone. So I am not an advocate of AI being used by non-experts. There has to be a layer between the AI output and the decision. And so it really should be viewed as a tool. So if it's in the hands of a doctor, it should be viewed just like a doctor views X-rays or MRI. It's a tool that they can use to augment. Similarly, for all of us who use AI assistants, ChatGPT to write essays or to summarize information or things like that, it has to be used as a tool. It cannot be used as something that will take autonomous decisions. So there is a very big difference between, for example, using ChatGPT if you're already an author and you know how language needs to be used, and using ChatGPT if you don't know the language at all and you just use it, right? Similarly for programming, if you don't know how to program and use a Copilot, you'll probably make lots of mistakes. So this is the general issue with AI. So I think, as we were discussing earlier, the needle has moved from complete mistrust of AI to complete trust, almost overnight. And both are equally bad, right? So this is a huge challenge in the work that we do when we deal with stakeholders, actually educating them on what AI is good at and what is not good at. So we often have to do these workshops where we teach people, we do capacity building and things like that. This is a challenge. And then, of course, this long tail of AI where you have to keep retraining models in a deployment context is a challenge as well. And then evaluating AI is a third challenge. So it's a very difficult space to be in when you're developing AI for these sort of public applications.
You have said, what about the financing side of it? One is this sort of trying to be cautious about what this can be used for, what it cannot be used for, and it's very easy to fall for this kind of determinism around these kinds of technologies, right? But as a non-profit, obviously for you to do this work, especially given the challenge that you have identified just now, right? It's just not developing a product, but making sure that, there's additional burden on you to making sure that it is used appropriately, right? Without bringing this sort of excessive determinism about what it can do. So is there anything on the financing side that you have?
So usually, we get philanthropic financing to do our projects. And philanthropic financing de-risks the initial part, right? So all the way to, collecting, so it de-risks collecting data, developing models and piloting models. But then scaling up and then constant maintenance is usually not supported by philanthropic capital. So our way of working is that we would like to partner with an entity that's already scaled up, like the government, to whom we can transfer the AI. We do not want to own it beyond a certain period of time. So that is the way we are thinking. But see, we've been doing this seriously only for about 3 years now, even though we are 6 years old. The first 3 years we were doing a lot more research and so on. And it's only now that we are encountering some of these issues. So I don't know, we'll probably solve them on a case-by-case basis, but this is a real challenge.
Before we sort of ask the audience if they have any questions, the sort of one of the concerns, especially in the communities that I operate in, is that a couple of things that, so there is this, despite some pessimism around how much we are progressing towards sustainable transition, the more optimists, like Bill Gates, with the optimism around technology, right? So some people believe that we have already sort of reached the threshold in this transition that is sort of irreversible, in the sense that the broader changes that we are looking at, for example, the recent election results in the US, where the new president is sort of well known to have sort of objections to make US continue to be in the Paris climate summit or make investments into climate change and all that. And we also have this sort of lot of economic distress post-COVID as economies recover from the pandemic, right? Those are sort of considered to be adding sort of this counterweight to the progress that we are making, right? So do you have any thoughts on what is your own assessment of, are we really at reach that threshold or cross that threshold where we can assume this transition? It may take 10 years, 50 years, that we don't really know whether we are making the transition fast enough is not enough. But have we reached or crossed the threshold that where we can assume that the transition is going to continue to take place at whatever pace it is supposed to, or are we going to sort of turn back clocks and build across the US and elsewhere, build lots of coal-fired power plants?
This time I'll go last.
Well, I think, as they say, the most difficult thing to predict is the future. So it's hard to say, at least in what we do. I think the AI bus has already left the station in a sense. So I don't think much can be done, much will be done to rein it in. People are already talking about, tech companies using nuclear power to train these models and so on, which is a bit scary. I am a bigger believer in these small models, small language models that can be trained on the edge, and I think much more appropriate for countries like India. And that is also much more sustainable and so on. But I think it's gone out of control already.
I think it will be sectoral. So in transportation, for example, where as I'm talking about India, where we are an importer of oil, we'll find economic sense in pursuing down this path and we'll make progress over there. But coal, we might not find that. We will continue to focus on reduction of inequality and attention to poverty and all those areas which are around inclusion and the other sustainability goals that we have. So I think, I don't think that is at any risk. Coal, anybody's guess.
I'm reminded of this cartoon where a similar kind of conversation is happening between two people, and then one of them says, okay, what if it turns out that we did all this good for nothing? Right? So, so nothing has really changed. As you said, I think it's difficult to predict the future, especially on tech like AI and on climate change. The best thing for individual actors like companies, institutions and not-for-profits is to adopt this more normative mindset of doing everything that they can without trying to figure out what's going to happen. I mean, that's the best that they can do, and hopefully hopefully the techno-optimists will win.
Yeah.
Though you may have arguments for and against. So yeah.
That's what I mean. When my students ask, some art student in the class will ask, like, I heard that these are all hoax, right? The climate change and all. I always say that I really wish that it is a hoax. I will be the happiest person if it is actually a hoax, right?
One, thankfully, we believe in karma.
I think I want to. What you talked about is it is a dilemma at an individual level and a corporate level. What might help is to have the pessimism of the intellect and the optimism of the spirit. The pessimism of academics and the optimism of Bill Gates and the like.
Okay. Great. On that note, we open the questions to the audience.
So I have two questions. First, how companies can collaborate to accelerate the progress on SDGs or achieving the climate targets? Second question is the famous the theory or the thought propagated by the Jason Hickel of the degrowth, which can become a alternate trend because the topic is global trend.
Okay, I'll take a shot at the second one, degrowth. So, see, degrowth, it's a philosophical argument. I don't think we can, we have enough time for that. But there's this interesting statistic about SDG 12. So, SDG 12 is about sustainable production and consumption. Sustainable production is the easy thing to do. How do you green your factories? How do you make your processes more efficient? How do you invest in renewable energy? How do you produce in a greener way? Sustainable consumption is a different kettle of fish altogether, because companies who, let's say, commit to sustainable consumption, in some sense, have to ask their consumers to, at some point, consume less. because the quantum of consumption is part of that overall equation. Now, which company would do that, right? So, I don't think and I think, I mean, at least I'm not an expert, but there are, fortunately today, within economists, there are schools of thought that cogently argue for and against at the same table. So I don't think there's one template that emerges out of that. Some countries do need growth, like India maybe. Some countries maybe don't need growth that much. What are the implications of that in terms of jobs, in terms of environmental footprint, right? So those are the nuances of that. The first part for companies collaborating together.
So I think value chain is a good example of
Yeah.
collaboration. So as value chain evaluation of sustainability on both sides of the value chain comes into focus. Already this year, SEBI has a voluntary rule that on a explain or report or explain basis to consolidate 75% of your revenue and 75% of your vendors core parameters of scope 1, 2, 3 emissions, etc. into your, they already have this regulation in place. So this was the value chain focus will force this collaboration.
Thank you so much. First of all, thank you so much for such a wonderful panel discussion. As an early career researcher, I just wanted to know few insights from you. As we are discussing on the sustainability, CSR is basically the expenditure, what kind of things you are doing for the society. This is, as for the art, if you are doing certain things for your company, that is not considered as the CSR. I did a survey of Indian manufacturing sector. I just wondering, those companies, those who are doing such activities engaged in environmental kind of CSR, they are getting less energy cost, and particularly they are become energy efficient. Operational, they are getting operational efficiency in the matter of environmental sustainability. I just wanted to know what is the mechanism behind this? That means how really helping these social activities at the farm level, like a company like you.
No. So you are absolutely right that CSR cannot be done for business.
Yeah.
It has to be done for, there are 7 activities identified in Companies Act in the schedule. You can only do CSR around that. But you can do that CSR adjacent to your business footprint. For example, if there is a manufacturing company who has a big plant, then they can do CSR in the 5 villages around or the 20 villages around that plant. Similarly, for a financial institution whose footprint will be across the country, they can decide that wherever we have a footprint of our operations, where we have our people present who can go and see things if required, there we will do projects which are CSR in nature. But that CSR will have to comply with that Schedule 7. There can never be a good and give and take in CSR. It's not permitted.
I have to tell you one thing, your question. When the CSR law was being drafted, there were multiple consultations with industry, and industry networks like CII and others were working. Till the penultimate draft, actually the law or the way it was articulated included the whole spectrum of what happens inside the business, inside your value chain, and outside in CSR, till the penultimate draft, which meant that you could spend 2% across the spectrum. But in the final draft, the inside part was removed, the value chain part was removed. We did argue that if you want to make companies more responsible, and if you want to mandatorily make them spend 2%, you have to cover the entire spectrum, right? But anyway.
But they've retained the concept of adjacency.
Sorry?
Yeah, adjacency.
Yeah, but still it is outside, no? It's outside the value chain.
Absolutely.
It's outside the value chain.
Totally.
Right. So,
Thank
you so much for the session. It was truly a great one. I have 3 questions typically catered for each one of you. So, from whom should I start? Should I just go like that? Right. So, Narayan sir, my question to you is, if we are talking about sustainable initiatives, right now let us consider the crucial case of green hydrogen. Now, if you're talking about green hydrogen, that can help us save scope 3 emissions in future or scope 1 emissions in futures. But at the same time, to generate hydrogen, we are using energy. Then storage facility issues are also there. And at the same time, construction of hydrogen plants, that is also generating emissions. So right now, we are not able to even understand the scope disclosures or be accurate with our data and monitor that. How will we consider this interrelation of scope emissions? Like while reducing emissions, we are also producing emissions. So from the company's point of view, how do you think this will emerge out as an analytical framework?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's a technical question, and I don't think all the answers are very clear. But essentially, when you, for example, when you report an emission which is within your scope 1, which is from an asset or an equipment that you own, you are supposed to report associated scope 3 emissions that went into the making of it, starting from the mining to the making to the different stages till it reaches your factory or your company. So that's what you're supposed to do, right? As things stand, scope 1 and scope 2 today is more accurate because it's within your control. Scope 3 is based on models. Those models could be, these are different models, econometric models that are based on sectoral value, purchase value, or other kinds of models, right? So yes, scope 3 is not as accurate as you would like to be, but we are progressing on that. We'll go there, we'll get there. Otherwise, conceptually, what you're saying, every company has to do. You cannot say that I'm using green hydrogen and in my operations, but I will not report the upstream emissions of how the green hydrogen was produced. You have to do that.
And so my next question is for you. You mentioned that you are using AI-based models to detect from voices if the students have some sort of dyslexia. So, sir, for these AI models, they must also have certain level of matrices to decide whether the detection is being done. So, how do you decide those matrices?
You mean the metrics to decide if the AI is accurate enough?
Yeah.
Yes, so that we have to do a lot of field research to look at what accuracy level is this AI deployable.
So how do you authenticate or find its relevance?
So that's exactly why we do field research. So we test it in the field, we make sure it's accurate enough that you can go to the next level of deployment. So the AI models are never 100% accurate. So there are various questions you want to ask before you get into deployment. One is it significantly more accurate than the current best practice on the ground? So that it's going to get, overall statistically, it's going to have more impact. Sometimes that question is not enough, because what if it is the case that your best practice on the ground, current best practice, is impacting certain individuals positively who will be impacted negatively by the AI. So this is often a question that we face. I mean, not in this particular example, but in various healthcare contexts. So if the AI is producing an error that was not being produced earlier, even though statistically it is more accurate, then what do you do? So that gets into an ethical dilemma of sorts. The way we've addressed it so far is to do both, the AI and the non-AI practice. But this is a difficult ethical dilemma in general.
And so my question to you is that you mentioned that you are asked to evaluate risks on the basis of lending portfolios. So if we look at frameworks like TCFD and banks like HBSC, they are following certain risk mitigation strategies that give them a good score in TCFD. So if we look at the case of Kotak, are you guys following any sort of risk mitigation practice that gives you a competitive edge over the other banks, something which is unique or innovative specifically with reference to Kotak?
So the evaluation which I mentioned is an ESG scorecard. It is not just TCFD is only a risk evaluation framework for climate risk. So climate risk is a part of some of those scoring parameters we use. There isn't enough information available just now to do an entire TCFD style analysis. because you need a taxonomy, you need to identify the assets, you need to, the lending of those assets, you need to figure out emissions in all your borrower companies. 60 to 70% of a bank's balance sheet is retail. How do you get the scope 3 emissions from there? So there are a multitude of challenges in implementing a proper theoretical TCFD framework. But there are, so you use other measures which are part of your environment analysis. But then there are also social and governance factors. So you look at ESG, and then we had a 60 parameter framework. We are modifying that just now, essentially to score loans which were more than a certain size and longer than a certain tenure. But yeah, it was not closely linked to credit decisions. We did not find a very high correlation.
Thank you.
Okay, the last question. Thank you. Yeah.
First of all, thank you, sir. It was really insightful discussion and a lot of learnings. Something that we will take with us. My question is about, you mentioned in one of your points about embedding sustainability as part of business strategy. But if you can elaborate with an example of, how are you marrying the two things, sustainability and strategy? Because typically we've learned that strategy is all about, creating and maintaining that competitive edge vis-a-vis the competitors, being always one step ahead of your competition. So how do you see these two things coming together?
So I'll just give an example, a couple of examples. I mentioned that we have to do small and marginal farmer loans. We can just go and distribute crop loans across the country, have huge NPAs and absorb losses and achieve that target. That's one way of doing it. Another way of doing it is we said that, okay, let's focus on the type of loans which will give us the SMF lending and also be profitable. Okay. So we focused on tractor financing. Tractor and farm equipment is what we call it. We focused on that financing, and that financing, we are the market leaders in the country now. Though we are not the largest bank, we are the 4th largest private sector bank. But in this segment, we became the market leaders. And it helped us achieve our SMF portfolio at a decent profitability. Similar thing goes for microfinance loans. So microfinance loans are joint lending to women borrowers, as you may be aware. So that we acquired a company called BSS Microfinance. We didn't have the business, we acquired it. And those loans are also eligible for small and marginal farmer because the money is used for ancillary agricultural activity. So through that process, that business is again very profitable. So we went down a route where we don't question ourselves why we are doing this business ever.
Thank you, sir. It's clear.
Thank you very much that we have run out of time now, and thanks for your questions, and thank you PSN, Alpan, Chetan for those insightful conversations. Thank you very much.
Thank you.